EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back to Football 24/7 on JAKIB Sports. I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II, and I'm joined by our Eagles insider, John McMullen. First and foremost, before we get too deep into the nitty-gritty of the content, you guys know what to do. Smash that like button. Make sure you guys stay engaged in the content. Comment below in the live chat. And if you're watching this live stream after the fact, if you aren't able to catch this thing live, that's all right. Comment below. Still tell us what you think. And also make sure you guys are subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. And if you guys want more content from John McMullen, you guys know he's one of the best writers, one of the best journalists covering the Philadelphia Eagles. Check him out on SI.com and also check him out on JAKIBsports.com. So, John, man, first and foremost, how are you feeling today, man? I know it's been a long day for you.
Yeah, doing well. Got to meet Alberto today. Still working on it. He said his name. I had it for about 10 seconds, and now it's gone.
The pressure got to you?
Pressure got to me. So now that was earlier this afternoon. So, yeah. But nice kid. You know, very big. We'll see. I don't think there's I don't think long term they're going to keep 4 tight ends on this roster. So I think, you know, he'll be given an opportunity to sort of compete with Grant Calcaterra. We'll see how long that competition lasts, but I don't expect both to be on the 53-man roster for an extended period. So it's going to be interesting, and we'll see if he can then, you know, push and make the team. There's certainly traits. You know, he's what's called a traits-based prospect in the NFL. Hasn't really put it together in Denver, but 6'5", 258, runs a 4.49. You know, enticing. And the Eagles really only gave up, if you think about it, draft positioning, because they got a 7th-round pick back in 2025, and they gave up a 6th-round pick. So essentially they just gave up the positioning between the 6th-round pick and the 7th-round pick. So not a ton.
So I'm trying to think, right? A guy like Grant Calcaterra, you know, we've been bringing him up quite a bit, especially when it comes to that tight end 2 competition with him and Jack Stoll. Then you bring in our guy Albert O. I'm going to start calling him that as well, because I know I can't pronounce the last name. I'm not going to try. But I got Albert O here. It's fascinating because when Grant Calcaterra came out, he had some traits as well, you know, some pass catching traits. I mean, obviously he wasn't the most physically imposing, especially when it comes to run blocking, right, and getting physical. But you know, I've always taken to him as someone who is more of a vertical tight end, a guy that can, you know, get it done in the passing game rather than in the run game. But it seems like the Eagles are still not quite satisfied where he is in his development. You know, why do you think it's why do you think the Eagles haven't really been able to settle in on Grant Calcaterra for being that tight end 2, let alone the tight end 3?
Well, I don't think there's any competition. Jack Stoll is kind of the second tight end, and I think the Eagles like Jack. I think, you know, it's a different type of tight end. He's more of a blocker. So, you know, they've kind of piecemeal it. They have Jack to do the blocking, Grant Calcaterra to do the receiving. Grant's kind of an oversized slot receiver, really, if you think about it from that standpoint. So, you know, Albert is a little bit more physically impressive, imposing, faster, bigger, stronger. but he's not known for his blocking either. So, and that's part of the reason why Denver decided to turn the page on him. Yeah, relatively high 4th round pick back in the day. So, one of the things that Matt Russell was the Broncos vice president of player personnel when they drafted Albert, and he's here now as a senior personnel director. So he knows him really well, drafted him. So there's some commonality from that standpoint. It's just the typical Eagles dart throw. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, it's not going to affect much. But I think it's a worthy gamble because of the physical traits. And if you can put it all together on your watch, maybe you have something. Hasn't happened yet, but still only 25 years old. And again, Denver informed him he was going to be waived, so they were moving on. But the Eagles, remember, they were 31st on the waiver claim list. So from their standpoint, if he got to waivers, only 24, I said it yesterday, or on Birds, or maybe with you. We didn't do a show yesterday, so it was on Birds.
Right.
Only 24 players got claimed league-wide. So I don't know if he would have gotten claimed, but if he did, the Eagles were probably not getting them because of how low they were on the list. So you give up a little bit of draft, as I said, slotting, and you're able to ensure that you get the player.
Elaborate on how much that waiver positioning that the Eagles have. They're 31, like you said. Elaborate on how much that's affected their decision making when it came to building this initial 53-man roster.
I mean, not much. I mean, they knew they weren't going to pick up a lot of people on waivers, even if they did claim them. One, they're not claiming a lot of players because they're one of the deepest teams in the NFL. So, I always joke that 3 is the number. If you claim 3 or more players, you're a bad football team. 3 teams claim 3 or more players: Arizona, Carolina, Indianapolis.
Hopefully Carolina claimed more O-linemen than anything.
Well, thinking it from this perspective, which I say this all the time about people that are fearful of waivers. The Eagles had a 90-man roster since April, mid-April, when they started this off-season program. So they worked with these people through the summer. And if you're Arizona, who claimed 6 players, they claimed another player today, that's a bad sign because you've been working with your own young players and you're saying, well, these guys aren't good enough. We have to go out and get people we're not familiar with, we haven't worked with, we haven't done anything with. And the Eagles aren't like that. Now, I say if you claim 1 guy, not a big deal. Claim 2, and the Eagles claimed 2 last year and went to the Super Bowl. That's kind of how he wants to do something. He gets a little bit antsy, gets a little bit excited. You want to just, it's something to add. It's something that makes you happy. But remember who they claimed last year, Tone. It was Ian Book, and it was Trey Sermon. Where's Ian Book right now? Out. Where's Trey Sermon right now? Out. I mean, people get too worked up about waivers. I say it all the time.
I guess I think about it from this perspective. The Eagles kept more D linemen than we thought they would, right? And I feel like because of their positioning on the waiver wire, that prompted them to keep more of the position that they deemed more valuable, right? Like they kept so many D linemen, but they kept so little wide receivers, for example, right? So I feel like their waiver position had to play some factor in their decision making when it came to constructing that initial 53. What, you say so?
Well, they're concerned about people the Eagles and the Chiefs and the good teams are more susceptible to getting players claimed than obviously bad teams. So they're more concerned. Eli Ricks would be the best example. They were concerned that Eli Ricks was going to get claimed. Would he have? We'll never know. I'd still bet against it, but we'll never know. But their sentiment was that he was more likely to be claimed than Mekhi Garner. My sentiment was what they're going to have all three, and I include Mario Goodrich, and they have all three. I mean, but they didn't risk losing Eli Ricks. They risked losing Mekhi Garner. But again, nobody picked him up. Nobody claimed him on waivers. The two people claimed on waivers were Kayvon Wallace and Josh Sills, and they're claimed by the Arizona Cardinals. Jonathan Gannon, very familiar with Kayvon Wallace, and the Indianapolis Colts. Josh Sills of Shane Steichen, very familiar with Josh Sills. Eli Ricks is brand new. Mekhi Gardner's brand new. They wouldn't have been familiar with that particular player.
Right.
So, but they ultimately got the players they wanted to keep, all three of them. So it doesn't matter. But long term, I mean, they're not going to carry 13 defensive front players the whole season. I'd be surprised if there's 13 for week 1, to be honest. There's still movement that's going to be made between now and next Tuesday. When they hit the practice field on Wednesday for week 1 in New England preparation, that's when what their week 1 53 will be locked in. Will be locked in at that point. Not until then. As an example, the Eagles worked out 3 punters today. And I know everyone is excited to move on from Aaron Cepas. So they worked out 3 punters. They worked out a long snapper. They worked out a linebacker. It was Blake Gillikin, Pat O'Donnell, Colby Wadman. Bradley Robinson was the long snapper. Kyle Sowell was the linebacker. Not exactly familiar names. Now, Punalytics says Blake Gillikin is the best punter available.
What was that again? Punalytics?
Punalytics, yeah.
I've never even heard. Is that like the PFF for punters?
It is. They know more about punting than me, so they say he's the best one available. I don't know. Obviously, the Eagles brought Aaron Cepas back to the practice squad, so he's on the practice squad right now.
Okay.
Everybody wants Matt Ariza. I've seen no evidence that the Eagles are going to bring him in, so people can argue all they want. I don't think it's happening. But if nobody impresses them, they're just going to elevate Aaron Cepas for 3 weeks and then probably put him back on the 53. And now I would say, be careful what you wish for if it's going to affect other things. Remember, the Eagles don't punt a lot. They don't punt a lot. So they have one of the best offenses in football. On top of that, they go for it just about more than anybody else in plus territory. So their punter's going to punt the football the least amount of just about anybody. And Jake Elliott's very comfortable with Aaron Cepas. Something to think about. I wouldn't go nuts about punter and worrying about punter. Now, if you see somebody who's clearly an upgrade and Jake's comfortable enough with it, it's not going to affect his head, then pull the trigger. But it's not just as cut and dry as I think people think it is.
Yeah, you brought up that there are plenty more moves potentially on the horizon? Or what moves do you anticipate?
Well, I wouldn't say plenty, but I mean they don't have a punter. All right,
Okay.
week 1 on the 53. I'm talking about. They have
Okay.
Aaron's on the practice squad.
But there are moves remaining to be made. I mean, Harry Roseman, he never rests, right? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what moves do you anticipate them making going into the season?
Well, if they sign, let's use Blake as because he's supposed to be the best punter. If they sign Blake, he's probably going on the 53 right away. So then you have to make a move to put him on the 53. Punt returner. Are they comfortable with an Alameda Zacchaeus? Maybe they'll give him a game and see how he handles it. But remember, they also only have 4 receivers. Are they comfortable with that? So most of the movement, and we've talked about the defensive front, they wanted to keep these guys for that initial 53, but we use that term initial for a reason. You see, if you go look at the NFL transaction wire today, you'll see teams every day making a move, and the Eagles, they can do what they did last year with Britton Covey and elevate Aaron Cepas for 3 games if they want to, and they don't have to make a move on the 53. So you can do it short term, but you can't do it long term.
Right.
You have to put these people on the 53 eventually. And there's certain guys, Kentavious Street, I've argued, NFL player, good player, but how deep do you have to go to get to Kentavious Street?
Right.
You got to play Fletcher Cox and Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Milton Williams and Marlon Tuipulotu. You don't want to lose Moro Ajomo. How deep do you have to go to Kentavious Street? And he's only here for 1 year. He signed a 1-year deal. He's a veteran player. You don't have special teams. You don't have special teams coverage players. On the practice squad, you have Ben Van Sumeren, you have Kyron Johnson, you have Mekhi Gardner. Those are 3 of their best 6 or 7 coverage players on special teams. You can't elevate them all. So unless you want to hang Michael Clay out to dry, you got to figure out how to get some of those guys back on the 53. Maybe they're holding out for a trade, Derek Barnett or Kentavious Street. That's what teams do. Pittsburgh kept 2 punters
Right.
on their initial 53.
That had to be a bargaining chip for them.
Yeah, they were trying to trade, and but most GMs aren't stupid. They know Pittsburgh's not going to be able to carry 2 punters, so they just wait until they release them. Vikings tried to do it with our buddy Jalen Reagor. They're like, oh, we don't want to. Nobody believed it. They bloated stuff to Adam Schefter, and they say, oh, teams are calling about Jalen Reagor. No, they're not. The Vikings are trying to trade him. They want to get something for him. Ultimately, nobody took the bait, and they had to waive him. That's sort of what happens. And yeah, so until Wednesday comes around, and it's not just the Eagles, it's everybody else. The Patriots, the Eagles' week 1 opponent, their initial 53 had 1 quarterback, Tone. 1 quarterback.
Right. Yeah, they cut a Zappy and Cunningham, right?
Yeah, and they just claimed Matt Corral today. So, everybody's tweaking and changing.
You brought up the Patriots, and that drives the conversation forward perfectly. I've been thinking about this matchup, and I don't know, John. I feel like there are a lot of people underestimating what this Patriots team could potentially do to the Philadelphia Eagles. I understand the Eagles are a much more talented team, but the Patriots are very well coached all around the board, and that's not something I take lightly. Lightly. I don't take Bill O'Brien lightly. I don't take Bill Belichick lately, right? So, think about it from that perspective. What should be the Eagles' main concern entering that matchup?
I think the Patriots want to be those teams, and I talked about this with Eric Edholm this morning from NFL Media. The Patriots might be one of those teams that zig when everybody else is zagging. They're not an explosive offensive team, so as you see, everybody kind of is going in the same direction. Undersized players, hybrid safeties, hybrid linebackers, undersized players. And, I've been waiting for somebody to say, hey, there's a bunch of undersized guys on the other side. Let's try to run the football. That might be the New England Patriots this year. And if they do that against week one, they play a clean game. They're at home. It's Tom Brady Day. Eagles fans should have learned from last year in Detroit. Those home openers are difficult because everybody's fired up. The Brady stuff's only going to amp it up even further. It's going to be a difficult environment. Ultimately, I think a similar thing is going to happen. They're going to ultimately out-talent New England and probably win the game. But it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult than people think is how I would my early thought process on that game. Probably a little bit more difficult than people think, just like Detroit last year.
Like you said, the Patriots are going to try to out-muscle you, right? They're going to try to out-physical you at the point of attack. And, they have a running back over there who maybe isn't considered one of the best, but I think I would consider him productive. He had just over, I believe, 1,300 yards or 1,400 yards of total offense, passing, receiving, and running the ball. Also this Philadelphia Eagles defense stopping the run was their issue, right? And we talk about this all the time, John. The Eagles aren't necessarily trying to stop the run. But what happens when you run up against a team that's all they're trying to do really is run the ball? You think about that Washington game. They pretty much was, bullying them at the point of attack, and the Eagles ultimately got worn down. How do the Eagles safeguard against that, especially in week one, knowing it's a toxic environment for them on the road on Brady Day?
Yeah, I mean, they have to be ready to be malleable, and we'll see if Sean Desai maybe is a little bit more malleable because, 9 times out of 10, that's what the Fangio defense is. It's about, we always talk about +1 in the running game with Jalen Hurts and other quarterbacks who can run the football like Justin Fields, Lamar Jackson, etc. What the Big Fangio defense is about is +1 in the passing game. Your extra defender is in coverage. Well, it's not as dramatic, but it's like playing Navy in college football. A lot of people have trouble with Navy and the triple option because they never see it and they can't practice for it. And you can't justify practicing for it because nobody else runs it. Your entire schedule, you're never going to see it again. And they, occasionally will jump up and bite somebody because of that. And some other triple option. There's a couple other triple option teams as well, but it's not like that in the NFL, but the whole scheme is built on stopping the passing game and stopping explosive plays. And and again, 9 times out of 10, next week 2, you're going to be facing Minnesota. That's how you want to play because they have Jefferson and Osborne, and now they have Jordan Addison. They have a quarterback who throws the football. That's how you want to play. But New England, you don't want to play that way because they don't have explosive playmakers outside. They don't have a quarterback who's prolific throwing the football, but they can run it. And you need to be malleable. Like you might see Zach Cunningham playing 60 snaps in week 1 and they play on Thursday night in week 2, and 15 snaps in week 2. If Sean decides doing the right thing, and we'll see. We'll see.
Jumping over to the offensive side of the ball, right, with Brian Johnson, he's taken over as OC for Shane Steichen. We know how productive that Shane Steichen offensive identity was. We saw how productive Jalen Hurts was. I'm curious to know, what are some of your key performance indicators that will, show you that this offense isn't going to miss a beat?
Health.
Mm.
I mean, this offense is going to be good if everybody's healthy. I mean, they're too good. They're too good. Think about last year. They had 9 of the 11 who were either All-Pro, Pro Bowl, or Pro Bowl alternates. 9 out of 11. And the 10th one, the 2 that weren't, the 10th one is one of their best players, Dallas Goedert. He didn't get anything because he was injured for 5 games. That's the only reason. Otherwise, it would have been 10 of 11.
Yeah.
And the only other one is Quez Watkins. 10 of 11? I mean,
I like those odds. I like those odds, John. I'll be honest.
You got the best right tackle in football. Nick Sirianni calls him the best right tackle in the world, which is redundant because nobody else plays football but the United States. But Jason Kelsey, Hall of Famer. Jordan Mailata is tremendous. Landon Dickerson's in the Pro Bowl in the second year. Yeah, Cam Jurgens probably not going to be up to the level of Isaac Seumalo early, but still pretty talented kid. Goddard, tremendous. AJ, Devontae. Running backs aren't as certain, but I mean, they're going to out-talent people on offense. So I'm not too concerned about that.
So you think this Patriots matchup is just strictly just out-talent them? Like, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think their game plan going into that game is? How do you think they want to attack Bill Belichick's defense?
Well,
is it
by the way, the Patriots have a good defense. So the Patriots, they're going to make things difficult. That's one of the tougher. It's actually back to back because Brian Flores is in Minnesota.
Minnesota, yeah, exactly.
But I don't think they have the talent yet. But he's going to make that that defense was atrocious last year. He's going to make that defense middle of the road. He's that good as a coach, as a defensive coach. I don't know about a head coach, but as a defensive coach, he's loved the guy off the charts. And obviously, Bill Belichick, they're going to make things as difficult as possible defensively. But again, I think the Eagles will ultimately, they have so many playmakers, and they'll it's a good test because I always say that, the NFL is a copycat league, and it is, and it's cliche, but it's a slow-moving copycat league. So when people looked at the Eagles last year and they said, wow, they're doing this, they're doing that, the adjustments really don't come until the offseason when people can sit down and study what made them so successful. So people are going to adjust. They're going to try to take away what Jalen Hurts does best as much as possible. The Eagles are going to have to counter adjust, so to speak.
And if there's anybody that can do it well, it's Bill Belichick. He's known for taking away his strength.
And that's what I mean. Probably we talk about the schedule and the best teams are later in the schedule, but the best coaches to be tested are early.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, especially defensively. Because it's Belichick followed by Flores. And they're going to come up with good plans. And it's going to be a good test.
good plans indeed. Whether those players can execute it, that's going to be the issue. And I think, like you said, I think ultimately the talent is going to bring the Philadelphia Eagles over that hill. I want to ask you about, Nick Sirianni. He's entering year 3 as the Eagles head coach. What's been your evaluation of Nick Sirianni thus far? And has he exceeded, fallen short of, or has he met your expectations?
As a coach, he's been far better than anybody expected through 2 years. I don't know too many people who had the Eagles in the playoffs coming off the final year of the Doug Peterson era. And I don't know too many people that picked the Eagles to go to the Super Bowl last year. It's a production-based league, and he's produced. So there's not much criticism to levy at Nick Sirianni right now. But the expectations are so extreme this time around. It's going to be really difficult to live up to the expectations, and this is going to be his biggest test. But the NFC isn't very good on paper. It's not nearly as deep as the AFC. The Eagles are clearly the most talented team, and we'll see if they can cash in. But there's still, there's still 5 defensive starters. I saw it was a great rant by my buddy Sheil Kapadia, a tremendous rant about Jonathan Gannon, who people should go watch it on his podcast, The Ringer Philly Special, because Sheil's great. But he wanted to cut off the criticism of Sean Desai, and I've heard this from another people saying, well, the Eagles were so good talent-wise last year. And they were, but if Gannon was back, if Hargrave was back, this has been my point since the beginning. If CJ's back, if Marcus Epps is back, TJ's back, Kaiser White's back, everybody's back, they're not going to have the same year they had last year. It's not possible. They're not getting 70 sacks. They're not getting this extreme turnover advantage. It's a regression to the mean theory. And it generally holds up pretty well. So things are going to be much tougher this season. And I'm going to be interested to see how the Eagles handle these expectations, because they're out of whack, Tone. They're out of whack to the point I've heard it all the time. Like, people are acting like making the Super Bowl is not an accomplishment.
I'm a little greedy, but I'm biased, so disregard, my greed. There's no shame in my game, John. I'm an Eagles fan. And
well, I ask you this because you're an Eagles fan. I'll ask you this: how many times in the Super Bowl era have the Eagles made the Super Bowl?
And that, my friend, is unfortunately disappointing in and of itself. But I only can speak for the time that I was alive, right? That's all I can really speak for.
Well, there's 57 of them.
Right.
There's 57 of them. And we know they won 1, and we know they lost 3. So,
they were
it's
4
hard.
It's hard.
It's hard to make the Super Bowl. It is very, very difficult to make the Super Bowl. I know people are disappointed. I'm with you. I think the Eagles were the better team.
Mm-hmm.
They should have won the football game. They didn't play well defensively in the second half. Aaron Cepas with the bad punt, Jalen Hurts with the unforced error. They were the better football team. Mm-hmm. And it's extremely disappointing that they didn't win the football game.
It hurts, John. I know. It hurts.
But that does not mean that does not mean it wasn't an accomplishment. It was a tremendous accomplishment. It is the best team I've ever covered. It was better than the team that won the Super Bowl.
Mhm.
It was better than the 15-1 Minnesota team that I covered with Randy Moss and Randall Cunningham. They were better, but they didn't finish the deal.
I'm
To
still bitter, John. I'm still bitter.
But the bitterness is not the point. My point is to assume that's going to happen again is, lightning doesn't strike too often back to back.
Yeah,
Now,
I think you said something really interesting that pertains to that, right? The fact of the matter is, the Philadelphia Eagles, or I'll put it this way: Jalen Hurts can actually improve as a quarterback, but the Eagles can have a worse record. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
I remember you bringing that up, and that's such an interesting concept because as fans we attach so much we attach success to these very static things that aren't really fluid. You know what I mean? Like making the Super Bowl was an accomplishment, especially for a guy like Jalen Hurts, right? Especially for Nick Sirianni's career. Like no one expected those guys as a tandem to be able to make it that far, yet they did that. Yet us as fans, we're still unsatisfied because of the result and the way it happened. But I think what was for me, the consolation prize for me at least, was seeing the level that Jalen Hurts was able to take his game to. And now it remains to be seen if that's sustainable for years to come. I think he can sustain that. But again, it all remains to be seen. It's going to be exciting to see in this 2023 season.
Yeah, I mean, and everything's a sliding scale because
Right.
Obviously the talent around them changes from year to year. Injuries, I mean, that's a big part of the Eagles were extremely healthy. People ask me all the time, what could derail the Eagles season? I always go to, people say, well, they don't have linebackers, they don't have safeties,
Right.
the running backs, blah, blah, blah. Offensive line. That's what I go to. They have 2 injuries on the offensive line. Boom, season's over. Now, by that I mean Super Bowl aspirations.
Right.
Over. Because they don't have the depth they once had on the offensive line. And look, if you lose Lane Johnson, you can't replace Lane Johnson. If you lose Jason Kelsey, you can't replace Jason Kelsey. They're actually, Cam Jurgens is actually the, pretty good backup, but then you got to deal with right guard. AJ, I was talking to Eric. I mentioned Eric Edholm. One of those 2 guys gets injured, AJ or Devontae. Whole offense is different. You saw, and I talked about it all the time, AJ was the final piece of the puzzle on that offense. Everything fell into place. Everything fell perfectly into place. Devontae wasn't ready to be a 1, but he was a great 2. Maybe now he's ready to be a 1, but you're not going to have a great 2 if it's Devontae and Zacchaeus. Always is. It's for everybody. If you get the wrong injuries at the right places, any team can be derailed. And obviously the quarterback is, most important of all. Special is special, and last season was special. And a lot of people seem to think it wasn't, which is bizarre to me, to be honest.
A lot of emotions are tied up in that, John, mine included. Really quickly though, before we get out of here, final question. We've been talking about this offense and this defense, players. Throughout the season, we've talked about players who had a lot of pressure, so on and so forth. Who do you think are poised to make the biggest jump in the 2023 season? Give me one offensive guy and one defensive guy. Who are those 2 players to you that are poised to make the biggest jump?
Well, offense is easy to me because he didn't play last year, and I think he's going to be a good player, and that's Cam Jurgens. obviously, you know, probably a little bit of a downtick from Isaac, but I think he's going to be a solid player pretty much from the get-go. Defensively, similar. He didn't play, and now the Eagles got everything on him, and that's Nakobe Dean. I mean, he played 34 reps last year, and now he's the quarterback of the defense. So I would say, obviously, and I said this on the show this morning, Birds 365, obviously the most important player on the Eagles is Jalen Hurts. So he's the quarterback. But you can make a strong argument the second most important player is Nakobe Dean, quarterback of the defense. So those are the two. And I think he's a good player, and I think he's going to be fine. My questions with Nakobe have to deal with durability. You know, he's already been hurt in training camp twice. TJ Edwards played 20 games last year, 95% of the snaps. Can you see Nakobe Dean playing 20 games through the Super Bowl with 95% of the snaps?
I'll be honest with you, John. Seeing TJ Edwards build, you know, seeing how he carried himself, you know, just physically, and how he transformed his body. You know, Nakobe's, you know, so young. You know, TJ had time to really, you know, build that up. You know, being on practice squads and eventually making a roster and so on and so forth. He had some time to build that up. Nakobe, man, I mean, again, I'm with you. I don't think it's a talent issue or a football IQ issue. I'm more so concerned about, can he hold up? And I'm very unsure about it.
Well, you have to be. I mean, he hasn't done it before, so and you know, it's hard playing 20 games. And that, by the way, it wasn't only TJ. It was Kaiser played 20 games.
Yeah.
Marcus played 20 games. Marcus Epps, Slay, and Bradbury completely healthy.
Yeah. That's not also, again, like you said, just how the sacks and the turnover differential, those kind of things don't repeat itself. Having this level of consistency when it comes to health, you know, you got to be blessed by the best to have this thing last for a long time, and it usually doesn't.
No, and that's just you know, an odds thing. And we, you know, Hassan Reddick is going to be playing with some kind of protective apparatus on his thumb. He's going to play. How is he going to be as effective without the ability to use his hand? I don't know. We'll see. Nolan Smith finally got back to practice. That's a good sign, but he missed 5 straight practices. He gave that weird quote about his shoulder being his baby. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm like looking at him like, what the hell does that mean? I'm a little concerned about that. Yeah, I mean, but injuries, you know, that's baked into everything. You can't legislate them. You can't. It's not like you can sit and worry about them. I mean, you play the guys if they're healthy. If they're not, you got to go in a different direction. I'm just talking purely odds. The odds are you aren't going to be as healthy as you were last year. And again, I mean, we're in this Ricky Bobby society. I call it all the time that if you know, there's no, I think people forget that's a great movie. People forget it. You know, it was Ricky's father. If you're not first, you're not, you're last, you know.
Right.
And at the end of the movie, you know, he was a drunk and he's saying, what do you mean? I you know, it's like, you could be second, you could be third. What do you mean? That's dumb. Yeah, they had a very successful season. I saw somebody in the chat say, special would have been a trip down Broad Street for the parade. All right. That's what I'm talking about, man. I mean, 57, you know, Super Bowl 57, you know what that means, right? It means there were 57 of them. All right. So it ain't easy.
They never should have gave us the one. Now we're insatiable.
It is not easy to win a Super Bowl. And Tom Brady kind of skewed it as well.
Yeah, I think that's another thing too. That because when you think about it, there are 32 teams in the NFL. There's been 57 Super Bowls. The Eagles have made 4 of them. I mean, when you think about it's some teams that have never even been there. So I mean, you bring up an interesting point, John. I mean, maybe I do need to alter or somewhat finesse my perspective. I don't know. It's hard for me to
if you're
dilute.
not, like I said, I don't know when it changed. I don't think it had to do with the movie, but the whole, if you're not first, you're last. I used to talk about it on the radio about the Sixers during the process, and this mentality of it's championship or bust. It's championship or bust. Well, if it's championship or bust, you're going to be disappointed for the majority of your sporting life if you're a fan, because it doesn't work that way. It's hard to win.
I think
everybody, guess what? Everybody else is trying to win too.
Yeah. I don't know. The Sixers are a different case, though. They're another case study.
Well, I just mean the whole mentality of.
Right,
I think in a lot of ways, I think the Sixers broke Philadelphia because I think they're responsible for the mentality of if you're not first, you're last here locally. Championship or bust. It's about a championship as opposed to in the old days. The athletes would take pride in going to a losing situation and building it up and turning it around. Not everybody, but a lot of them. These days, it's more of let me pick where it's already good and chase a ring. And it's not good or bad, but it's hard to win. It's hard to win. It's hard to win Super Bowls, and that's why I'm not saying it shouldn't be disappointing because the Eagles were the better team.
I got you. That's not your point. Your point is the bottom line is it's a difficult task, and to think that everything is going to bounce your way so you can get to the promised land. That's just not how the sport works. Like we saw in the Super Bowl, the better team lost that game. There were some things that just didn't bounce your way. And that's just sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. John, I've kept you for long enough, my man. I really appreciate you. You've been tremendous as always, my man. You guys, make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you guys check John out on si.com and check him out on jakibsports.com. He does a lot of writing, for both platforms, and he's really great at it. One of the best Eagles reporters in the market right now, and I'm willing to bet a month's salary on that. But nonetheless, though, John's my guy, man. You guys smash that like button, stay engaged with the content. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. I'm your guy, Tony DeShields II. He's John McMullen. You guys were locked in on football 24/7. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.